Hi everyone, welcome. See this towel here? This is the towel from which we had cut a few chunks of material. I think each chunk must have been about this size or so, and was placed into each of these bins and left for the worms to consume. And it was during the last check-in 12 days ago that we finally decided to put the test to an end. There was still a little bit of this material. I believe it might have been the material that they use on the very edge of the towel to stitch up the edge part of it, because everything else got consumed except for just one strand of material. So you can see this material is extremely faded. Some of its original color still shows over here, but this stuff was out in the sun for many years. So I believe that here too, I think just some signs of some mold or some other deterioration. So this towel has seen much better days. In fact, it's so fragile you could just like pull on it a little bit and it'll tear right away in your hands. So I just wanted to show really quick what this stuff looked like prior to our composting of cotton test. And you know, last check-in, like I mentioned earlier, we put that test to an end and we removed what remained of the fabric, which was really just a strand of some sort of synthetic material removed from each container. Now, when we checked in here last time, besides ending the cotton composting test, we kind of found that the older of the two bins, the one that had no coverings on it, was a lot more damp than the younger system over here. So we felt it would be wise to allow the older system to ventilate a little bit and dry off so that it wouldn't be so muddy and clumpy. So one thing I did last time was what you saw here, was just leave the cover off. So the younger system has actually had sort of double covers for the past 12 days since the previous check-in. And here in the older bin we've had no covers. And I've even come back into these systems, well, not even the younger one, just the older one. I've come back to the older system a number of times to aerate the material. So even though we fed down the middle, and that's what the feeding as an indicator was meant to show, this system has been aerated a number of times, tilling up the contents, moving everything around, and attempting on each occasion to submerge the more dry stuff that had been out on the surface, blending it in down into the more damp materials that are down lower, hopefully bringing the moisture level in the entire system down as a result. So here I don't think we're gonna have much success in just examining the previous feeding zone, since everything in this container has been repeatedly blended up and mixed together. But maybe we could do a quick little check of what's going on in the younger system to see what's progressing there. So we've got some things in here, like usually I find sticks like this in my worm bins. I have a tendency to simply just, remove them, because it just seems like the type of material that's not really going to break down too quickly. On the opposite side of that coin, though, I've got something that's also very wood-like, which is the stem of a pumpkin. And these things I just place into the bins as more of a test to see, how long it takes for the worms in the worm bin to break this stuff down. Aha, here we have the cork. The older of the two systems also has an extremely slow composting item in it, which is the cork. And then here too, a fairly slow composting item is the mango seed. This here must be what remains of the actual seed itself, or is this just a chunk of, I don't even know what this is. Maybe it is what remains of the actual seed that's within the husk, and mainly what I'm finding within there is just castings left behind the worms that were coming in there to explore. So sometimes I just like to try to put those things back into the husk of the mango seed. So as you can see, the worms are quite content in this material, probably because it is still pretty damp, but it does seem a little bit more crumbly than it did last time. Last time it was exhibiting the signs of being too wet, which to me is usually just clumpiness. The stuff doesn't want to flow and crumble away. It wants to just stick together in a big mass, But if we're able to press it together into a little bit of a ball, and then it breaks apart pretty readily just from pressing on it, then I believe what was previously seen to be excess moisture in this material might have finally vanished, which is kind of cool. So I did come into this bin 2 times to aerate, according to my notes. One of them was most recently 4 days ago, and then maybe a couple days prior, maybe 6 days ago. And usually an aeration is followed, or follows, usually I'll do one of these aerations after the system has been left to sit in front of the fan overnight or for a day or so that the material on the surface, top surface, is quite dry to be blended into the more damp materials. And to me it seems like that's probably what contributes the most to the drying of the material. So I've gone ahead and I've excavated where we're going to drop in today's feeding, put in some of these older items back down into the hole, including the test object, the cork. And let's see how things are doing in the younger bin over here, where we have actually been covered up with 2 pieces of paper for the past 2 weeks. There was something about the weight when I lifted up the older bin to bring it up here on the bench, and then came afterwards back with this younger bin. It felt to me like this younger bin might have even been heavier at this point than the older bin, suggesting that maybe it has a greater amount of moisture content now than the older bin. Perhaps we have to do a switcheroo and leave this one uncovered now for a while and let it air out and dry a bit, and then maybe we'll be at a point where they're kind of equal again. So man, look at all those. I just noticed how many springtails are cruising around on this seed. I guess I did chip away a little bit of the skin that's on the seed, some of what we found to be leftovers in the other system too, but when I did chip away a little bit of this, it seemed like tons and tons of little springtails running around. Springtails are kind of a normal thing in most worm bins, although I normally in the past had not seen too many of them. And it was just most recently I started seeing them pretty heavily showing up in one of my smaller systems. My system where I've got the mixed red worms living. And then there were other bins too, and I believe that it was these 2 systems where I was beginning to see what looked like a little bit of an outbreak. Perhaps not quite as bad here as I've seen in my mixed bin, but still my preference would be to see somewhat fewer springtails in my worm bins. I don't have a problem with them per se, but I really like to see a higher concentration of just worms in my worm bins, and then a little bit of this, a little bit of that as far as the helper critters that live in the bins with the worms. So here the material I thought might be starting to get a little bit overly damp by being covered up the way it was with those 2 sheets of newspaper, but things look pretty good here. I can't complain. I did worry that maybe things would get a little bit overly muddy here, but here too, if I can kind of break apart a clump, see this clump is kind of holding together, that might already be an early sign as to the fact that this system might have a bit more moisture in it than what I would consider to be ideal. I'm sure the worms appreciate the moisture. So now here, as I plow through the middle section where we last fed, there's definite remnants of the previous feeding. I could see scraps of paper, little shreds, little bits of this and that. I mean, the feeding they got 12 days ago down in these feeding areas was stuff like watermelon, stuff you wouldn't expect to see much leftovers of after 12 days. But the shredded paper and stuff that I put in as bedding to go hand in hand with the feedings, that's the sort of stuff that might occasionally remain as leftovers of the previous feeding, but definitely not much. So I think before we excavate a hole into which to place the feeding in this bin, we'll just follow suit with what we did in the older system, which is to just till up the entire contents, look everything over quickly, see how things are, The moisture level's pretty consistent throughout. Perhaps it was a little bit more damp down the middle where the watermelon had been placed, which is understandable. But we've, for the most part at this point, blended it all in, I believe, with all the surrounding materials that might have not been as damp. So I think we're going to be in good shape. I mean, we don't have to have exactly perfect, identical bins, but I do like to try to strive for that when I'm running bins like this as sort of buddy bins, side by side. You know, handling them the same, treating them the same, and everything like that. So I think we're ready to feed. Why don't we return this stuff back down, and then as bedding, I'm going to come back in here again, just like I did last time with my prepared bedding. Go grab that. So now I did recently replenish the supply of this stuff, and I have tapped into the most aged portions of it. So some of what we're going to be using here was only prepared a few days ago. It's not too old. It's usually at this point that I want to try to make sure I'm not dropping any unsuspecting hitchhiker worms off my glove into my supply of prepared bedding. So this stuff is pretty nice. It's been left to sit here and kind of age. It's been dampened. It's not only shredded paper and cardboard, but it also has some leaves mixed into it. So the combination of all those things sitting together, I think, makes for a pretty good foundation for a feeding. So I think that looks pretty good. I think we're ready to come in with the foods that I bought for them. So the stuff we've got for them is, I believe this is some squash. So we'll give each system a little bit of squash, and then this is mushroom. And see about trying to break this up so that each system can get a fair shake at the mushroom feast as well. I think we're doing a pretty good job here as far as divvying up the food equally. And let's see, the last thing that I had here was some cantaloupe rind. Last time they got watermelon, this time they're getting cantaloupe melon. So hopefully they appreciate the tasty meal. That's pretty much all of it. And I was even thinking maybe it wouldn't hurt to just drop in a little bit more bedding, because the other thing that I've got for them is some worm chow. I replenished my supply of worm chow the other day. It's mainly birdseed on this go around. A little bit of like old pancake mix that I had, but I don't think there's much of anything else in this mix. It's mainly birdseed, but I thought I would lay down a little bit more bedding so we can introduce the birdseed based dry worm chow powder into that bedding, which I believe will attract a good bit of attention to itself. And you know what? Sometimes I put the grit that I use out here in front of me. It's just crushed eggshell. And sometimes I have it right there on the ready to be used, and I totally forget to apply it. This time I'm going to not forget and drop it in and give it to the worms. So that's our feeding. Things look pretty nice here. Let's get them covered up. So we've already effectively examined the outskirts of each system. We've tilled up the material through and through. I would probably have to say at this point that we've teetered from having the older bin of the two appearing to be overly damp, but not so anymore. And I guess on the flip side now, we're seeing a little bit more moisture than in the older bin. We're seeing a little bit more moisture over here in the younger bin, but not to the extent that I believe we would have to react to it. I think we're going to be in good shape. So I think in both bins we're going to be okay. Just coming right back on with our paper coverings, pretty thorough paper coverings going over the entire surface of the material, covering things pretty good, but still leaving things dry enough on the surface that, for example, the feeding zone indicators didn't really show many signs of wear. So if there were plastic coverings and there would be moisture recirculating beneath them, then a piece of paper like this would be fairly damp at all times, and it would also, as a result of that, draw a fair bit of attention from the worms, and they would be nibbling away on it pretty regularly. But I think with just paper covers like this, things stay pretty dry. Alright everyone, that's it for our check-in now with our red wiggler worms, the 216-day and the 181-day-old bins, getting feeding number 19 over here and feeding number 16 over here. Alright everyone, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.